He won't hit you. He won't scream at you. He won't even look like the kind of man people warn you about. And that's exactly why he's dangerous. Because the men who do the most damage don't show up as villains. They show up as exactly what you were hoping for. Calm, attentive, interested, safe, at least in the beginning. And by the time the pattern reveals itself, you're already emotionally invested, already explaining things away, already trying to understand instead of stepping back. Most people think toxic behavior is obvious, that you'll know when something is wrong. But the reality is much more subtle. The most harmful dynamics don't feel like danger at first. They feel like connection. They feel like chemistry. They feel like intensity. And that's what traps people. Because when something feels good in the beginning, your brain builds a narrative around it. You don't just see who he is, you see who he could be. And that potential becomes the reason you stay longer than you should. This isn't about obvious red flags. This is about the behaviors that quietly predict how a man will treat you long-term. The patterns that don't look serious until you're already affected by them. And once you see them clearly, you won't be able to unsee them. Behavior. Number 1. He moves fast, but only emotionally. At first, it feels intense. He opens up quickly, shares personal stories, talks about connection like it's something rare and immediate. He makes you feel seen, understood, almost chosen, like the bond between you is different from anything he's experienced before. And in a way, it feels flattering, because vulnerability creates closeness fast. But here's what most people miss. Emotional intensity is not the same as emotional stability. A man who accelerates connection too quickly is often skipping the foundation required to sustain it. He's building closeness without consistency, depth without structure. And what feels like intimacy can actually be impulsivity, because real connection develops over time through repeated actions, not just words. When someone rushes that process, they're not necessarily investing, they're escalating. And escalation creates attachment before clarity. You start feeling something real before you've had the chance to evaluate what's actually happening. And later, when the behavior shifts, when the attention drops, when the energy changes, you don't question the pattern. You question yourself. You try to get back to how it felt in the beginning. But that beginning wasn't stable. It was a spike. And spikes always come down. So if someone builds emotional closeness faster than they can maintain it, you're not seeing depth. You're seeing a preview of inconsistency. Behavior number 2. He avoids clear communication, but expects understanding. There's a specific kind of confusion that doesn't come from what someone says, but from what they don't say. You ask simple questions, and the answers are vague, indirect, open to interpretation. Plans feel uncertain. Intentions feel implied, but never clearly stated. And yet, somehow, you're expected to just get it, to understand where things are going without ever having a direct conversation about it. This creates a psychological imbalance, because clarity requires effort, and avoidance avoids responsibility. When someone refuses to define what they want, they keep control of the situation while you carry the emotional weight of figuring it out. You start analyzing behavior, reading between lines, trying to piece together meaning from fragments. And over time, that uncertainty becomes exhausting. Not because you're asking for too much, but because you're being given too little. In a healthy dynamic, communication reduces confusion. It aligns expectations. It creates stability. But when someone consistently avoids being clear, it's not accidental. It's a pattern. Because ambiguity benefits the person who doesn't want to be held accountable. And the longer you stay in that space, the more you adjust to uncertainty as if it's normal. But it's not. And the moment you start feeling like you need to decode someone instead of understand them, something is already off. Behavior number 3. He's consistent until you start caring. In the beginning, everything feels stable. He texts, he shows up, he pays attention. There's a rhythm to it, something you can rely on. And that consistency is what builds trust. It's what allows you to relax, to open up, to start investing emotionally. But then something shifts. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough to make you question it. The replies get slower. The plans get less certain. The energy becomes unpredictable. And the most confusing part? You know what he's capable of, because you've already seen it. That's what keeps you hooked. You're not chasing something imaginary. You're chasing something that was real, but isn't consistent anymore. This is where intermittent reinforcement begins, one of the strongest psychological conditioning patterns. When attention becomes unpredictable, your brain works harder to regain it. You become more focused, more invested, more attached. Not because the connection is stronger, but because it's unstable. And instability creates obsession. You start measuring your worth based on his behavior. When he's present, you feel secure. When he pulls back, you feel anxious. And without realizing it, your emotional state becomes tied to his inconsistency. But real interest doesn't decrease when you start caring. It deepens. So if someone becomes less consistent the moment you become more invested, that's not coincidence. That's a pattern. And patterns don't fix themselves. Behavior, Darfur. He makes you feel like you're asking for too much. You start with simple needs: clarity, time, effort, basic emotional presence. Nothing extreme, nothing unrealistic. But somehow, when you express those needs, the response shifts the focus back onto you. You're overthinking. You're too sensitive. You're asking for too much. And slowly, the narrative changes. It's no longer about what you need. It's about whether your needs are valid at all. This is a subtle form of emotional minimization. It doesn't look aggressive. It doesn't look abusive. But it reshapes how you see yourself. You begin to question your expectations. You lower your standards, not because you want to, but because you've been made to feel like they're unreasonable. And over time, you start asking for less. Not because you need less, but because it feels safer than being dismissed. This creates a quiet imbalance in the relationship. One person defines what's acceptable. The other adapts. But healthy relationships don't require you to shrink your needs to maintain connection. They require both people to meet somewhere in the middle. If expressing basic emotional needs consistently leads to you feeling guilty, dramatic, or excessive, that's not a compatibility issue. That's a misalignment in respect. And the longer you ignore that, the more disconnected you become from what you actually deserve. Behavior, number 5. He keeps you emotionally close, but structurally undefined. There's closeness. There's chemistry. There are moments that feel real, even meaningful. You talk. You connect. You share parts of yourself that you don't share with just anyone. And yet, despite all of that, nothing is clearly defined. No direction, no commitment, no structure that matches the level of emotional intimacy being created. This is where many people get stuck. Because the connection feels like a relationship, but functionally, it isn't one. And that gap creates confusion. You don't know where you stand, but you feel too involved to step back. He gives just enough to keep the bond alive, but not enough to anchor it into something stable. And over time, you start accepting emotional closeness without relational clarity. But here's the problem. Emotions without structure create attachment without security. You feel connected, but not grounded. Invested, but not certain. And that uncertainty keeps you in a constant state of evaluation, trying to understand what this is, where it's going, what it means. But real intention doesn't hide behind ambiguity. If someone is capable of building emotional closeness with you, they are also capable of defining what that closeness is. And if they consistently choose not to, that's not confusion. That's a decision. Behavior number 6. He disappears when things get real. Everything flows. Until it matters. When things are light, easy, and emotionally convenient, he's present, engaged, available. But the moment the dynamic requires depth, a real conversation, accountability, emotional responsibility, something changes. He pulls back, gets distant, takes longer to respond, or disappears entirely for a while, only to return later like nothing happened. And when he does come back, he doesn't address the absence. He just resumes the connection, expecting you to do the same. This creates a cycle that's incredibly destabilizing, because every time things start to feel real, they reset. You never get resolution. You never get closure, just interruption and continuation. And over time, you start adjusting to that pattern. You avoid bringing up serious topics. You keep things light to maintain his presence. But that means the relationship never deepens. It just loops. Because emotional availability isn't tested when things are easy. It's revealed when things become uncomfortable. If someone consistently withdraws the moment real connection requires effort, they're not incapable of depth. They're avoiding it. And avoidance doesn't build relationships. It delays them while quietly draining the person who keeps trying to hold everything together. Behavior, number 7. He turns everything into your fault. Subtly. It's not always obvious. There's no direct blame, no harsh accusations. In fact, it can sound calm, even reasonable. But somehow, every issue circles back to you. If you feel hurt, it's because you misunderstood. If something bothered you, it's because you're too sensitive. If there's tension, it's because of how you reacted, not what caused the reaction. This is a form of quiet deflection. It shifts responsibility without confrontation. And because it's subtle, it's harder to detect. You don't feel attacked, you feel confused. You start second-guessing your own perception, replaying situations in your head, trying to figure out if maybe you did overreact. And that's how the dynamic slowly flips. Instead of addressing the actual issue, you end up analyzing yourself, adjusting yourself, regulating yourself. While his behavior remains largely unquestioned, over time this erodes your confidence in your own judgment. You stop trusting your emotional responses. You hesitate before bringing things up because you're already anticipating that somehow it will come back to you. But in a healthy relationship, responsibility is shared. Both people can acknowledge impact, not just intent. If every problem consistently becomes your fault, even indirectly, that's not communication. That's distortion. And distortion makes clarity impossible. Behavior. Number 8. You feel drained, more often than fulfilled. At the beginning, the connection gives you energy. You feel excited, engaged, emotionally alive. But over time, that starts to shift. The interactions feel heavier, more effortful. You leave conversations feeling tired instead of uplifted. Not because of one specific event, but because of a consistent pattern. Small tensions, unresolved issues, emotional unpredictability. It accumulates. And eventually, the relationship starts taking more from you than it gives. This is one of the clearest signals, and one of the most ignored. Because people often focus on isolated moments, the good days, the intense conversations, the temporary highs. But what matters is the baseline, how you feel most of the time, not occasionally, not at the peak, but consistently. Your emotional state is data. And if that data shows ongoing fatigue, confusion, or stress, it's not something to rationalize away. Healthy relationships don't require constant emotional recovery. They don't leave you feeling like you need space just to feel like yourself again. They support your energy, not deplete it. So if you find yourself more drained than fulfilled, more tense than relaxed, more uncertain than secure, that's not a small issue. That's your system responding to a pattern that isn't sustainable. Now here's what ties all of this together. None of these behaviors, on their own, always look extreme. That's why they're so easy to miss. So easy to excuse, so easy to stay in longer than you should. Because you're not reacting to one clear event, you're adapting to a pattern. And patterns are powerful. They shape how you think, how you feel, how you interpret reality. The longer you stay in them, the more normal they start to feel. Until one day, you look back and realize how much you adjusted just to keep something going that was never stable to begin with. And this is the part most people avoid. Awareness creates responsibility. Once you can clearly see a pattern, you can't unsee it. You can choose to ignore it, but you can't pretend it isn't there. And the real question becomes, what do you do with that awareness? Because staying isn't neutral. It's a decision. Just like leaving is. One keeps you in a dynamic that's already showing you what it is. The other forces uncertainty, but also creates space for something healthier. So this isn't about judging him. It's about recognizing what your experience is consistently telling you, because behavior patterns don't lie. They repeat, and what repeats reveals. If you recognized even one of these patterns, don't just scroll past it. Comment below which behavior stood out to you the most. And if you want more breakdowns like this, real patterns, real psychology, no sugarcoating, make sure to subscribe. Because the next thing we're going to break down might completely change how you choose who you let into your life.